Emma stared at the small apartment with a mix of dismay and resignation. The one-bedroom rental looked even smaller in person than it had in the photos. She set her suitcase down with a sigh. "It's just for a few weeks until they fix the plumbing at our place," Tom said, putting his arm around her shoulders and giving her a reassuring squeeze. Emma nodded and tried to smile. She had only been married to Tom for 6 months, and now they faced their first real challenge. Water damage had made their apartment unlivable, and their budget only allowed for this tiny replacement. "Jack will be here tomorrow," Tom reminded her, referring to his 22-year-old son from his previous marriage. "I know it's not ideal timing with him visiting for summer break." Emma felt her stomach tighten. She had met Jack only twice before, at their wedding and once for dinner. Both times he had been polite but distant. Now they would be sharing this cramped space for weeks. "We'll make it work," she said, more to convince herself than Tom. The next day, Emma was arranging the pull-out couch when the doorbell rang. She smoothed her sundress and took a deep breath before opening the door. Jack stood there, taller than she remembered. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and his blue eyes, so like his father's, widened slightly when he saw her. "Hi, Emma," he said with a small smile. "Dad said he'd be running late from work." "Yes, he called me earlier," Emma replied, stepping aside. "Come in. I've been setting up the sleeping arrangements." Jack followed her inside, his broad shoulders making the small space seem even more compact. He set his duffel bag down and looked around. "Sorry about all this," Emma said, gesturing to the pull-out couch. "You'll sleep here, and your dad and I will take the bedroom." "It's fine," Jack said. "Dad explained about the flooding. Thanks for letting me stay. I know this isn't what you planned." There was something in his voice that made Emma look at him more closely. He seemed more mature than she remembered, more thoughtful. Later that evening, after Tom arrived home, they ordered pizza and tried to make the best of their situation. Tom dominated the conversation, talking about work and the repairs at their apartment. Emma noticed how Jack listened patiently, asking questions at the right moments. The next morning, Emma woke early. She slipped quietly from the bedroom, trying not to disturb Tom, who had come home late from work. To her surprise, Jack was already awake, sitting at the small kitchen table with a cup of coffee. "Morning," he said softly. "I made coffee if you want some." "Thanks," Emma replied, pouring herself a cup. The kitchen was so small that her arm brushed against his as she reached for the sugar. An unexpected warmth spread through her at the brief contact. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the early morning light filtering through the thin curtains. "Dad mentioned you're a teacher," Jack said finally. "Yes, high school English," Emma replied. "What about you?" "Your dad said you're in your final year of college." Jack nodded. "Engineering. One more semester." The conversation flowed more easily than Emma had expected. Jack asked thoughtful questions about her teaching, and she found herself genuinely interested in his studies. By the time Tom emerged from the bedroom, they were laughing over stories from Jack's childhood. The next few days established a pattern. Tom left early for work and often came home late. Emma, on summer break from teaching, found herself spending most days with Jack. They took turns cooking in the tiny kitchen, their bodies often close in the cramped space. One evening, as Emma reached for a pan on a high shelf, she lost her balance. Jack's hands caught her waist, steadying her. For a moment, they stood frozen, his hands warm through the thin fabric of her shirt. "Thanks," she whispered, turning to face him. They were standing very close. Jack stepped back quickly, his cheeks slightly flushed. "No problem," he said, his voice a little rough. That night, lying beside Tom, who was already asleep, Emma found herself thinking about Jack in the next room. The weight his hands had felt on her waist. The weight his eyes had lingered on hers for just a moment too long. She turned over, trying to push the thoughts away. This was going to be a long few weeks. A week into their cramped living situation, Emma and Jack had fallen into an unexpected rhythm. They shared morning coffee, took turns making meals, and often watched movies in the evening while waiting for Tom to return from work. Tom's hours seemed to grow longer each day, with the company facing what he called critical deadlines. Emma found herself looking forward to her time with Jack more than she wanted to admit. There was something refreshing about his company, the way he listened when she spoke, his thoughtful questions, the quiet respect in his eyes. One evening they decided to cook dinner together. The kitchen barely fit one person, let alone two, but neither suggested taking turns. "Can you pass me the salt?" Emma asked, stirring the sauce on the stove. Jack reached around her, his chest brushing against her back as he grabbed the salt from the shelf above the stove. His breath tickled her neck, and Emma felt goosebumps rise on her skin. "Here," he said, his voice lower than usual. He didn't step back immediately, and for a moment they stood there, bodies touching slightly. Emma turned her head, finding his face inches from hers. "Thanks," she whispered. The sound of keys in the door broke the moment. Jack stepped away quickly as Tom walked in, looking tired but smiling at the sight of them. "Something smells amazing," Tom said, giving Emma a quick kiss on the cheek before dropping onto the couch with a sigh. During dinner, Emma caught Jack watching her several times. Each time he would look away, but not quite fast enough. She found herself wondering what he was thinking. The next day, rain kept them indoors. Tom had left before dawn for an early meeting, and Emma and Jack spent the morning reading quietly in the small living room. Around noon, Emma stood to make lunch. "Let me help," Jack offered, following her to the kitchen. They worked side by side, making sandwiches. The simple task shouldn't have felt intimate, but somehow it did. "You're different than I expected," Jack said suddenly. Emma looked up, surprised. "How so?" Jack seemed to consider his words carefully. "When Dad first told me he was getting married again, I pictured someone, I don't know, trying too hard to replace my mom or something." Emma smiled softly. "I would never try to do that." "I know that now," Jack said, his eyes meeting hers. "You're your own person. A really interesting one." Heat rose to Emma's cheeks at the compliment. "Thank you. You're not what I expected either." "Let me guess. You thought I'd be some immature college kid who couldn't pick up after himself." Emma laughed. "Something like that." Their eyes held a moment longer than necessary. Jack reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Emma felt her breath catch. "Jack," she said softly, not sure if she was warning him or encouraging him. He dropped his hand, looking away. "Sorry." "It's okay," she said, though she wasn't sure it was. What was happening between them definitely wasn't okay. That evening, Tom called to say he would be working late again. Emma and Jack ordered takeout and decided to watch a movie. They sat on opposite ends of the couch at first, but as the movie progressed, the distance between them somehow shrank. By the climactic scene, their shoulders were touching. Emma told herself to move away, but she didn't. The warmth of his arm against hers felt too good. When the movie ended, neither moved to get up. "Can I ask you something personal?" Jack said, turning to face her. Emma nodded, feeling both nervous and curious. "Are you happy? With my dad, I mean." The question caught her off guard. "Why would you ask that?" Jack shrugged. "He's hardly ever here. And when he is, you both seem, I don't know, like roommates more than newlyweds." Emma looked down at her hands. "Marriage is complicated. Your dad works hard." "That's not an answer," Jack said gently. When she looked up, his face was closer than she expected. She could see the flecks of lighter blue in his eyes, the slight stubble on his jaw. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I thought I'd be happier." Jack's hand covered hers, warm and reassuring. It was a comfort at first, then something else as his thumb stroked across her knuckles. "You deserve to be happy," he whispered. Emma knew she should pull her hand away. She knew the conversation had crossed into dangerous territory. She knew the way her heart was racing wasn't appropriate. But she didn't move. Instead, she watched as Jack leaned slightly closer, his eyes questioning. Warning bells rang in her mind, but they seemed distant and easy to ignore. The sound of Tom's key in the lock shattered the moment. They jumped apart just as the door opened, revealing Tom with a tired smile and a briefcase full of work he brought home. The next morning, Emma woke to find Tom already dressed for work, packing an overnight bag. "I have to go to the Chicago office," he explained when he noticed her watching. "That client is having issues with the system rollout. I'll be gone for 3 days, maybe 4. Emma sat up in bed. "You didn't mention this before." Tom shrugged. "It just came up. Martin called last night after you went to bed." He leaned down to kiss her cheek. "You'll be okay here with Jack, right?" Emma felt her stomach tighten at the mention of Jack's name. After what had almost happened last night, being alone with him for days seemed dangerous. Of course, she said, not meeting Tom's eyes. After Tom left, Emma stayed in the bedroom longer than usual, unsure how to face Jack. When she finally emerged, she found a note on the kitchen counter. Gone for a run. Back soon. Coffee's made. J. Emma poured herself a cup, relieved for the temporary reprieve. What was she doing? This was her husband's son. Whatever she was feeling needed to stop before it went any further. The door opened and Jack walked in, his t-shirt damp with sweat, his hair tousled. He stopped when he saw her, a moment of awkwardness hanging between them. Morning, he said finally. Your dad had to go to Chicago, Emma said, the words coming out too quickly. Work emergency, he'll be gone a few days. Something flickered in Jack's eyes, uncertainty, maybe, or possibility. Oh. That day they circled each other carefully, maintaining distance, keeping conversations light. By evening, the tension had become almost unbearable. Emma decided to take a shower, hoping the hot water would clear her head. She stood under the spray longer than necessary, trying to sort through her confused feelings. When she emerged from the bathroom wrapped in her robe, she found Jack in the kitchen making dinner. I thought you might be hungry, he said, not looking up from the stove. Thank you, she replied, touched by the gesture. They ate at the small table, making small talk about safe topics, a book he was reading for class, a difficult student she'd had taught last semester. It felt almost normal, until Emma reached for the salt at the same moment Jack did, and their hands touched. Neither pulled away immediately. Emma looked up, meeting his eyes. About last night, Jack started. We shouldn't talk about it, Emma said quickly. Jack set down his fork. Why not? Are we just going to pretend nothing's happening here? The directness of his question caught her off guard. Nothing should be happening. I'm married to your father. I know. Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Believe me, I know how messed up this is. I've been trying to ignore it since I got here. Jack. But I can't stop thinking about you, he continued, his voice low and intense. The way you laugh, how your eyes light up when you talk about books, the way you bite your lip when you're thinking. Emma felt her resolve weakening with each word. No one had ever seen her so clearly, not even Tom. We can't, she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. Tell me you don't feel it too, Jack challenged. Emma stood up, needing distance. She walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. She felt Jack move behind her, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his warmth. Emma, he said softly. She turned, meaning to tell him they needed to stop, but the words died in her throat when she saw the raw emotion in his eyes. I know it's wrong, he said, but being near you every day, seeing you, talking to you, I've never felt this way about anyone. Emma knew she should step away, but her body wouldn't listen. Jack, I'm 16 years older than you. I don't care. Your father isn't here, Jack finished. He's never here. He doesn't see you the way I do. Emma felt tears gathering in her eyes. This would hurt him. Jack reached up, gently wiping away a tear that had escaped. I don't want to hurt him. He's my dad and I love him, but I can't pretend I don't feel this. His hand lingered on her cheek, and Emma found herself leaning into his touch. Just tell me to stop, Jack whispered, moving closer. Tell me you don't want this, and I'll never mention it again. Emma knew she should say exactly that. She knew the right thing to do was to step back, establish boundaries, sleep on the couch if necessary to maintain distance. Instead, she whispered, I can't. Jack's eyes darkened, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. He leaned down and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was tentative at first, a question more than a demand. Emma knew she was crossing a line she could never uncross. Yet when Jack started to pull back, her hands moved to his shoulders, keeping him close. This time when their lips met, there was nothing tentative about it. The morning after their first kiss, Emma woke with a mixture of guilt and excitement churning in her stomach. She had fallen asleep in the bedroom alone, after she and Jack had spent hours talking and kissing on the couch. They hadn't gone further, though both had wanted to. It was Jack who had finally pulled away, saying they needed time to think. Emma slipped out of bed and found Jack in the kitchen, making breakfast. He looked up when she entered, his expression uncertain. Hi, he said softly. Hi, she replied, equally quiet. I made eggs, he offered, gesturing to the stove. Emma nodded, moving to pour herself coffee. As she reached for a mug, Jack's hand gently touched her waist. She turned to face him, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "I didn't sleep much," he admitted. "I kept thinking about you." Emma set down the mug. "Me too." "I meant what I said last night," Jack continued. "I've never felt this way about anyone before. But I need to know if you regret it." Emma considered the question seriously. She should regret it. What they were doing was wrong in so many ways. And yet... "No," she whispered. "I don't regret it." Relief washed over Jack's face. He leaned down and kissed her, more confidently than the night before. Emma's arms wound around his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, and Emma felt desire building inside her. Jack's hands slid down to her hips, and he lifted her onto the counter. Standing between her legs, he trailed kisses down her neck. "Jack," she gasped, her fingers tangling in his hair. The eggs began to smoke on the stove. Jack reluctantly pulled away to turn off the burner, and the moment of separation gave Emma a chance to catch her breath. "Maybe we should slow down," she suggested, though her body disagreed. Jack nodded, running a hand through his hair. "You're right. This is all happening so fast." They tried to have a normal day. They cleaned the apartment, watched TV, read books, sitting on opposite ends of the couch. But the tension between them kept building, each glance more heated than the last. By evening, Emma couldn't focus on anything. She excused herself to take a shower, hoping the cool water would clear her head. It didn't help. When she emerged from the bathroom, dressed in shorts and a tank top, she found Jack sitting on the edge of the pull-out couch, looking at his phone. "Dad called," he said, not looking up. "He's staying an extra day in Chicago." Emma sat beside him, careful to leave space between them. "Oh, he asked if we were getting along okay," Jack continued, finally meeting her eyes. "I said yes." "Are we?" Emma asked. "Getting along okay." Jack set his phone down. "I don't know what we're doing, Emma. All I know is I can't stop thinking about you." Emma's resolve crumbled. She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I know it's wrong," she said. "I'm supposed to be your stepmother. I'm married to your father. But when I'm with you, it feels right," Jack finished. She nodded, yes. Jack lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "What do we do now?" Instead of answering with words, Emma leaned forward and kissed him. She felt his surprise, then his response as he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her closer. They fell back onto the couch, Jack beneath her, his hands sliding under her tank top to touch bare skin. Emma shivered at the contact, her body responding with an intensity that surprised her. "Are you sure?" Jack whispered against her lips. Emma nodded, yes. "Are you?" "I've never been more sure of anything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Emma sat up, straddling him, and slowly pulled her tank top over her head. Jack's eyes darkened as he took in the sight of her. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his hands moving to her waist. Emma leaned down to kiss him again, and this time there was no holding back. Clothes were discarded, hands explored new territory, and whispered words of need filled the small apartment. Later, lying tangled together on the narrow pull-out couch, Emma rested her head on Jack's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "I know we'll have to talk about this eventually," she said softly. "About what it means. About your father." Jack's arms tightened around her. "I know. But not tonight. Tonight is just about us." Emma nodded, closing her eyes. She knew morning would bring reality crashing back, the guilt, the complications, the inevitable pain their actions would cause. But for now, in the darkness of the small apartment, wrapped in Jack's arms, she allowed herself to feel only the contentment of the moment. Tomorrow would come soon enough. The next 2 days passed in a blur of stolen kisses, passionate encounters, and hushed conversations. Emma and Jack moved between guilt and happiness, knowing their time alone would end soon when Tom returned. On the morning of Tom's expected return, Emma woke early. Jack's arm was wrapped around her waist, his body warm against her back. They had slept in the bedroom last night, crossing yet another line. "We need to get up," Emma whispered, though she made no move to leave the bed. Jack pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "Not yet." Emma turned to face him, her hand tracing the line of his jaw. "Your father will be home today." The mention of Tom dimmed the light in Jack's eyes. "I know. What are we going to do?" Emma asked, the question that had been hovering between them for days. Jack sighed, running a hand through his tousled hair. I don't know, I just know I don't want to give you up. Emma felt tears gathering in her eyes. This isn't fair to him. None of this is fair, Jack agreed. But I'm in love with you, Emma. The words hung in the air between them. They hadn't said it yet, though both had felt it growing. Jack, Emma whispered, her voice breaking. I know it's fast, he continued, and I know it's complicated. But it's true. I've never felt this way about anyone. Emma kissed him, trying to convey what she couldn't yet say in words. When they finally parted, she pressed her forehead against his. We need to get up, she repeated. We need to clean up before he gets home. They spent the morning erasing all evidence of what had happened between them. They changed the sheets, aired out the apartment, and moved Jack's things back to the pull-out couch. By afternoon, the apartment looked normal again, but Emma felt like the guilt must be written all over her face. They'll know just by looking at us, she worried as she paced the small living room. Jack caught her hands in his. He won't. We'll be careful. And then what? Emma asked. We just go on sneaking around behind his back? That's not right, Jack. I know, Jack admitted. But I can't just turn off what I feel for you. Emma's phone chimed with a text message. Her stomach dropped as she read it. Tom's flight just landed. He'll be here in about an hour. Jack pulled her into his arms. 1 more hour just for us. Emma melted into his embrace, trying to memorize the feeling of his arms around her, the scent of his skin, the sound of his heartbeat. They stayed that way until they heard footsteps in the hallway. Quickly, they separated. Jack sat on the couch with a book while Emma busied herself in the kitchen. The door opened and Tom walked in, looking tired but happy. Hey, I'm home. Emma forced a smile. Welcome back. How was the trip? Tom set down his suitcase and crossed to kiss her cheek. It took everything in her not to flinch. Exhausting but successful, he answered. Hey, son, how've you two been getting along? Jack gave a casual smile that Emma knew was as fake as her own. Great. Emma's been showing me around the neighborhood, and we found some good restaurants. Good, Tom said, clearly not really listening. He checked his phone. I've got about 50 emails to catch up on. Mind if I work for a bit before dinner? Go ahead, Emma said, relieved at the reprieve. As Tom disappeared into the bedroom with his laptop, Jack's eyes met Emma's across the room. The connection between them was almost tangible, a secret language already formed. Later that night, Emma lay awake beside Tom, who had fallen asleep almost immediately. The events of the past few days played through her mind on repeat. What had she done? How had she let things go so far? She slipped out of bed and went to get a glass of water. In the dim light of the kitchen, she found Jack, also unable to sleep. I miss you, he whispered as she approached. We can't do this, Emma said, though she moved closer to him. Jack reached for her hand. I know, but I can't stop. Emma knew she should pull away. Instead, she let her fingers tangle with his. What if, Jack began hesitantly, what if we told him the truth? Emma's eyes widened. We can't. It would destroy him. Maybe, Jack acknowledged. But living a lie will destroy us all eventually. Emma looked down at their joined hands. I need time to think. Jack nodded, though his eyes showed his disappointment. I understand. As Emma turned to go back to the bedroom, she heard Jack whisper. I meant what I said this morning. I love you. She paused, not turning around. I love you too, she whispered, the words barely audible. But she knew Jack heard them. The next few days were torture. Tom worked from home, making it impossible for Emma and Jack to have any time alone. They passed each other in the small apartment, their fingers sometimes brushing accidentally, their eyes conveying what they couldn't say aloud. Emma tried to act normal with Tom, but each time he touched her, she thought of Jack. Each night in bed with her husband, she lay awake, thinking of her Stepson on the pull-out couch just a few feet away. On the 5th day after Tom's return, he made an announcement over breakfast. I've been offered a promotion, he said, looking pleased with himself. The Chicago office was impressed with how I handled the situation last week. That's great, Emma said automatically. Congratulations. There's one catch, Tom continued, his eyes fixed on his coffee cup. It would mean relocating to Chicago, permanently. Emma felt her heart stop. Chicago. But what about my teaching job here? Tom shrugged. You could find a new position there. They have schools in Chicago too. From the corner of her eye, Emma saw Jack tense. He set down his fork with a small clatter. When would this happen? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. That's the thing, Tom replied. They need an answer by the end of the week. If I accept, they want me to start next month. Next month? Emma repeated, her mind racing. That's so soon. Tom finally looked up, his expression showing mild annoyance. It's a great opportunity, Emma. I thought you'd be more supportive. I'm just surprised, she said quickly. It's a lot to process. Jack stood up abruptly. I need some air, he muttered, heading for the door. Tom watched him go with a puzzled expression. What's with him? Emma shook her head. I don't know. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Later that day, Tom left for a meeting with his current boss. As soon as the door closed behind him, Emma texted Jack, who had not returned to the apartment. Where are you? 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Emma opened it to find Jack, his hair wine-brown, his eyes red as if he hadn't slept. You can't go to Chicago, he said without preamble. Emma pulled him inside and closed the door. Jack, it's complicated. No, it's not, he insisted, taking her hands in his. You don't love him, you love me. Emma felt tears well up in her eyes. He's your father, and my husband. A husband who barely notices you, Jack countered, who makes major life decisions without even consulting you. That doesn't make what we did right, Emma said, though she didn't pull her hands away. Jack stepped closer, his eyes intense. Maybe not, but that doesn't make it less real. What do you want me to do? Emma asked, her voice breaking. Tell him I'm leaving him for his son? Break up your family? I want you to be happy, Jack said simply. And I don't think you'll be happy in Chicago with him. Emma reached up to touch his face, allowing herself this small moment of contact. I need to think. This isn't just about us. Jack leaned into her touch. I have something to tell you too, he said quietly. I got a job offer in Seattle. It's with a great engineering firm, exactly what I've been hoping for. Emma felt her heart sink. Seattle. I was going to turn it down, Jack continued, because I couldn't bear the thought of being so far from you. But now with Chicago. Emma closed her eyes. Everything was falling apart so quickly. When would you leave? She asked. 2 weeks, Jack replied. Right after my graduation. Emma stepped back, creating distance between them. We need time to think. Separately. Jack nodded, though she could see the pain in his eyes. Okay. We can't keep doing this, Jack, Emma said softly, sneaking around. Lying. It's destroying me. I know, he whispered. But the thought of losing you. A key turned in the lock. They jumped apart as Tom walked in, carrying takeout bags. You're back, he said to Jack. Good. I brought dinner. He seemed oblivious to the tension in the room. That night, Emma lay in bed next to Tom, watching him sleep. She thought about their marriage, about how quickly they had rushed into it after meeting. She thought about how little they actually knew each other, how he made decisions without consulting her, how he was always working. And she thought about Jack, about his kindness, his thoughtfulness, the way he really saw her. By morning, she had made her decision. As Tom got ready for work, Emma sat on the edge of the bed, watching him. I need to talk to you, she said quietly. Tom glanced at her as he tied his tie. Can it wait? I have an early meeting. No, Emma said firmly. It can't wait. Tom sat heavily on the edge of the bed, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. Emma had just finished telling him everything, well, not quite everything. She had told him their marriage wasn't working, that she wasn't happy, that she wouldn't be moving to Chicago with him. Is there someone else? Tom asked, his voice oddly calm. Emma looked down at her hands. That's not why I'm leaving. That wasn't my question, Tom said. Emma took a deep breath. Yes, she admitted. But that came after I already knew things weren't right between us. Tom nodded slowly. I suspected. You've been different lately. He paused. Is it someone I know? Emma felt her heart racing. She couldn't tell him it was Jack. She just couldn't. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I should never have married you in the first place. We rushed into this and we're different people who want different things. To her surprise, Tom didn't argue. I think I've known that for a while, he said. I've been taking all these business trips, working late. I was avoiding coming home. I'm sorry, Emma whispered. Me too. Tom stood up. I'll call my boss and tell him I'm taking a personal day. We should talk about logistics. After Tom left the bedroom to make his call, Emma sat motionless, trying to process what had just happened. It had been easier than she expected. Almost too easy, as if Tom had been waiting for an excuse to end things too. Jack emerged from the bathroom, his expression questioning. Emma shook her head slightly, warning him to stay silent. Tom returned a few minutes later. Jack, he said, would you mind giving Emma and me some privacy? We have some things to discuss. Jack grabbed his jacket. Sure, Dad. I'll go grab some coffee. After he left, Tom and Emma spent the morning talking through the practicalities of separation. Tom would take the Chicago job. Emma would stay in the apartment until she found a new place. They would file for divorce based on irreconcilable differences. You know, Tom said as they finished their discussion, part of me is relieved. I think we both knew this wasn't right. Emma nodded, feeling a weight lifting from her shoulders. I never meant to hurt you. I know, Tom replied. Neither did I. By the time Jack returned in the afternoon, Tom had packed a small bag and was preparing to leave for a hotel. Dad? Jack said, confusion evident in his voice. What's going on? Emma and I are separating, Tom said simply. I'm taking that job in Chicago. You two can stay here until the lease is up next month. Jack's eyes darted to Emma, then back to his father. I'm sorry, he said, and Emma could hear the genuine sadness in his voice. Tom shrugged. These things happen. We rushed into something we shouldn't have. He picked up his bag. I'll come back for the rest of my stuff next weekend. After a brief, awkward hug with Jack and a nod to Emma, Tom left. The apartment fell silent. Jack turned to Emma, his expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Did you tell him about us? Emma shook her head. No. He doesn't need that pain. He knows there's someone else, but not who. Jack moved closer, taking her hands in his. What does this mean for us? Emma looked up at him, seeing all the possibility in his eyes. I don't know yet. I need some time. This all happened so fast. I understand, Jack said, though disappointment showed on his face. I should probably still go to Seattle. Give you space to figure things out. Emma nodded slowly. I think that would be best. I need to sort out who I am without Tom, or without you. And then, Jack asked. Emma allowed herself a small smile. And then we'll see. 3 months later, Emma settled into her new apartment, smaller than the one she had shared with Tom at all her own. She had thrown herself into teaching summer school, trying to keep busy as the divorce proceedings moved forward. Her phone chimed with a message. She smiled when she saw it was from Jack. I'm coming home this weekend. Can I see you? Emma felt the familiar flutter in her stomach. They had been talking almost daily, getting to know each other properly without the complications of their previous situation. She had visited Seattle once, and they had spent a wonderful weekend together, exploring the city and each other. Yes, she texted back. I'd like that. That night, as they spoke on the phone before bed, Jack's voice was soft with emotion. I can't wait to see you, he said. These months apart have been hard, but I think you were right. We needed this time. Me too, Emma replied. I needed to be sure what I felt wasn't just rebellion or confusion. And, Jack asked, a note of vulnerability in his voice. Emma smiled, though he couldn't see it. And I love you, Jack. I'm sure of that now. I love you too, he whispered. Always have, from the moment I saw you in that tiny kitchen.